Hello and welcome. The GYFT Show was originally created to help senior business executives who've been made redundant due to the COVID-19 pandemic to return to full-time employment or start a business of their dreams. Since we started production, our guests have been very generous with their time and their stories. Some guests have been made redundant at least twice in their careers. Other guests took a leap of faith and left high-paying jobs to start a business. Yet other guests had to change their business model due to changing economic circumstances. In this video, we want to share some of the lessons we learned. Please sit back and enjoy. Lesson number 1, stop wasting your time. I've got a saying that knowing doesn't precede doing. And I think also what you're saying there is there's only so much any one person can do well in a business, and you got yourself a business coach. And what I've learned over the last 15 months is I'm good at accounts, I'm good at doing video production, but there's areas that I need to delegate to my coach that he or she can do much better than I can do, such as marketing, SEO, website design, for example.
Yeah.
And you have to be kind of cognizant of your weaknesses. Don't take it to heart. Delegate work that you can't do yourself, but you have overall control of the strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree, John. The one mistake I see so many business owners make, particularly startups and people in their first 2 and 3 years, it's the same mistake that I made. You think, God, I can't afford to take in all this expertise. But if you actually look at the amount of time that you spend, sales generating time, revenue generating time, that you spend trying to learn these skills, that would be so much better off spent doing the things that you're good at. So say for me, connecting with people, sales are I'm actually very good at. But things like the accounts, very, very poor. Social media, SEO, very, very poor. So I hire people to do that for me so that I can concentrate on what I'm good at. And you've hit the nail on the head. That's the key in business to grow in your business.
Lesson number 2, avoid the furlined mousetrap. What motivated you to move from a secure job of being general manager of Bewley's to setting up your own franchise?
I didn't know this at the time, John, but I met a guy recently, an older gentleman in his 70s at this stage, thorough gentleman. And when I met him first, I was asking about his career, and he said, "I've made millions in my career." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, for other people," right? Because he spent all of his life working in senior roles in big companies, okay? And he called it the fur-lined mousetrap, right? And I said, "You better explain the fur-lined mousetrap to me." So he said, fur-lined mousetrap is that it is the corporate job. It's got a nice title. Sometimes it's a company car. Often has, you've got a regular salary. Often might have a bonus thing thrown in, etc. And it's comfortable and it's warm and it's fuzzy and it's furry, right? The fur-lined mousetrap. But it is a trap, right? For anybody who's ambitious. And it's a very difficult thing to get out of, right? A very difficult thing to be brave enough to step out of. So what I did to prepare myself for getting out was I began to study the principles of business ownership rather than working for somebody. And I came across a book which I'll happily recommend to you and to your viewers, and that is The Cash Flow Quadrant by Robert Kiyosaki. The Cash Flow Quadrant by Robert Kiyosaki, the second in his series of Rich Dad, Poor Dad books. And in it, Kiyosaki talks about the 4 players in the world of commerce: the employee, the self-employed, the business owner, and the investor. Right? And those 4 players, animals, if you like, are all different animals, right? And they all require different skill sets and to look at the world in a different way. I was an employee, clearly, at the time. But I also realized that I actually didn't want to be self-employed. I didn't want to trade one job where I was trading my time for money for being self-employed, where I also felt I'd be trading my time for money. I wanted, and I didn't have any money, so I couldn't be an investor. So that left me with the only quadrant, if you like, left was the business ownership quadrant. So I decided I needed to learn the skills of finding out how to build a business rather than being self-employed. And that put me on the path. I became open to it. I began to read stuff. I began to listen to leaders. I began to look around the people I knew. How is that person getting ahead and that person is not? And I just began to understand the different dynamics. And then the opportunity presented itself down in Limerick to take on the Bewley's Cafe franchise in Cruiser Street. And what I liked about that particular one was it was big enough, John, for it to be a business and for me not to be self-employed. It was going to be me and a team.
Lesson number 3, don't just say yes. People often rush into saying yes. Why is it important to pause for a minute and have the courage to say no from time to time?
Wow, what a great question, because this year and even last year, I was challenging myself to say yes when sometimes I would have normally have said no. But it is worthwhile just taking a deep breath, because that yes might incorporate an awful lot of work. It might not lead anywhere. Even if the person is sort of saying, oh, well, there are people there that will buy your services, when you know that it's not that sort of audience with respect. One of the things that I do with speaking, even now, is that when it's one of those people that contacts me, I wrap it round and say, I think it's fantastic what you're doing, but I only have a certain number of dates that I have available for charities or to do pro bono. And unfortunately, all of those dates have been taken up this year.
Lesson number 4, learn to say no. May I ask you a question? As a younger professional person, did you struggle to say no to people assertively? And if you did, how have you improved in that area?
That's a really good question. Have I ever struggled to say no? Yes, I think people do struggle to say no. I think physically the words no are very difficult. What I am very good at and have got better through the years is buying myself time. Because sometimes what is a knee-jerk yes or a knee-jerk no indeed isn't the right decision either way. So I'm very good at saying, let me get back to you. Let me check that and I'll come back to you. And doing that just buys me, whether it's 2 hours, sometimes I'll say I'll come back to you by the end of the day. I'll come back to you by the end of the week. Just to give myself that little bit of breathing space to make the decisions. Because as I say, it's very easy to make a knee-jerk sort of decision and say yes and overload yourself, or say no to something that actually would be really good for you. So I think buying myself time is something that I've always done, but I've definitely got better at as I've got older.
Lesson number 5, freedom is everything. I've had the benefit of reading your book. I did not miss the boat. And one of the things that stood out for me in your book is the sacrifices your parents made to get yourself and your siblings educated. Yeah. Can you give some outline of those sacrifices for the audience, please?
It's really hard to just saying that, what they have done, because I think not just my parents, I think many refugees, it's bravery. It's really a bravery move to left everything you built your whole entire life, everything that you only known at that point, to get to a place when you start up a new place at your 40s. Not just the culture, the language, everything. And for them to actually think that, that's what necessary for us to thrive, to have a future. That is a sacrifice that I can't really even put a price tag on it. It's almost like completely selfless. Don't think about you at all. All you're going to have to go through is for your children. And my dad had a really successful company career in Vietnam, even though he called himself as a blind ox because he didn't have education. Like I said, he never gone to 3rd grade. His dad was killed when he was 3, so he pretty much had to go out and help his mom to support the family. And he has like 3 younger siblings that he was helping his mom. So he worked really hard, but he did a very good, successful business with partner up with a couple other friends, and he has a dye company who dyed thousands of yards of fabric, and it was successful very much before the communists took over. And when the communists took over, they confiscated the company and they bankrupt a lot of people. So he has to build up again, you know, going from a middle class that learned to speak the language in the country at 36 years old. And at 44 years old, he has to come over to the United States and build up everything from the ground up, not knowing English. And he was afraid that we're going to become American and not knowing our own roots. So that's another thing. But he knew that in a sense that he has to let us go if we want to grow. And whatever they did, they worked so hard. In the restaurant, my mom was sewing from at home, at the factory, and babysitting. You know, everything they did was just for us. And that's why I want to write this book, because I want to honor his legacy. I can never repay the sacrifice that he did for us, but at least I can do a little bit of a good thing to honor him. And in that same token, honor a lot of refugee parents who did the unthinkable things so their children can thrive and can have a future and have freedom. Because freedom is everything. We rather die if we didn't have freedom. And that's why we, went to the sea to look for hope. And I'm so glad that God, looked over us and give us this second chance.
Lesson number 6, learn to value yourself. What's been the single biggest lesson that you've learned since starting Celtic photography?
Wow. What's been the biggest lesson I've learned? Look, I suppose for the fear of repeating myself, it's believing in yourself. Because you cannot expect anybody else to believe in you if you don't believe in yourself. So I think one of the many challenges I faced when I first started out was getting my pricing right, and I struggled with that for a long time because you're so desperate to get the work in that you price yourself very much at the lower end of the market, because you think it's all about let's just get the work in, let's just get a few bob coming in the door, rather than looking at what you do and the quality of the work that you provide and actually pricing yourself accordingly. And one of the many one-to-ones I probably had at the beginning, I chat about this to people and they'd all say the same thing. They'd come back with the same message. You have to learn to value yourself. I remember, I think one of the first jobs I did was, I don't know, I can't remember, it was a headshot or something like that. And maybe I charged, I don't know, €60, let's just say, for argument's sake, And I thought to myself, geez, that's not bad now, €60. If I could get 10 jobs like that a week, that would be the same as I was earning in the pub, happy days. That's not a lot. And then you sort of, as time goes on and you realize you have to pay out for so much stuff. You have to pay for your equipment, you have to pay for travel, you have to pay for insurance, you have to pay for web design and so on and so forth. And suddenly then when you start looking at the outgoings compared to the incoming, you realize actually €60 doesn't cut it, And obviously over time, as time goes on, you become far more aware of what your costs are. But you also have to sit down and you have to calculate, how long are you actually going to spend on the site taking the photographs, but how long are you going to spend then editing the photographs? And, as time goes on, you start to build up an hourly rate and you start to then realize this is how much I need to charge in order to be able to earn a living out of this. And it becomes easier. But in the short term, it's very hard to learn to value yourself properly, and I think that was, if I could single one thing out, it would be that. I would say, learn to value yourself properly.
Lesson number 7, take a leap of faith. I can only imagine, you mentioned there earlier in our interview that you came from a working class background, that when you graduated from university, you were the star in your parents' eyes, that they probably were nearly living their life through you. You got opportunities they never had in their lives. And seeing their daughter graduate from university and going into a law practice as a student solicitor was probably a great achievement for them. What was their reaction when you told them, law is not for me, I'm moving into a new profession in HR?
Yeah, oh my goodness, John, you're absolutely right. I mean, my mum and dad were both there when I graduated from university, and my mum came to London with me when I went through the ceremony to qualify as a solicitor. So we were, at the law school down in London. So both really big, memorable occasions for us. So I still remember now the day that I rang my parents. At the time I was working for a law firm up in Leeds. And on paper, on the face of it, I was living the life. I had a brand new apartment in the Royal Armouries. I was earning a very good salary. I lived in the city centre. I worked in the city centre. It was, on paper, it looked great, but I was so dreadfully unhappy. And I remember the morning I woke up thinking, I can't do this anymore. It's going to kill me. And I rang my parents and I literally said to them, I was wondering if my bedroom's still free at home. And my parents were like, well, yes, of course it is. You know it is whenever you come home to visit. And I was like, no, I wondered if it was free for me to come back home. And they said, yes, do you mind us asking why? And I said, this isn't for me. It's making me ill and I need to come home and regroup. And at the time, John, I didn't know I wanted to go into HR. So at that point, all I knew is that I didn't want to practice law. That was as far as I'd got. Hence, as I say, leap of faith. The initial leap of faith was, I'm quitting a very good, very well paid, very highly regarded role that I've spent all my life working towards. And I'm going back home at the age of 30 to say, I don't know what I want to do. So Mum took it very well. She was, whatever you need, come home. My dad struggled a little bit more. He couldn't get his head around, but you spent all this time, all this money, all this effort. You've worked so hard. Why are you giving it up? And it's like, because I'm unhappy. And I don't believe we're supposed to spend all of our working life being unhappy. And then he was like, okay, you know best. Bless him.
Lesson number 8, learn self-discipline. What's been the most important skill you have learned or developed since you became self-employed?
The most important skill, I think, is definitely the self-discipline. Having to discipline yourself, especially, being a life coach, you're working with people on the well-being, and it's important to look after your own well-being. I went into a well-being organisation straight from the O'Connor Centre with two friends. We set up a business together, and I was doing 90 plus hours a week, which was ironic considering it was a well-being organisation. When I pulled away from there and set up as a life coach myself, there was a lot of lessons from that, and self-discipline was a big one. To take that time off, spend that time with the family, and really get a good work-life balance. It doesn't mean that you don't have to work hard, because of course you do, because you're working on your own thing. But it's also important to get that family time and social time in. You see a lot of stuff from influencers and entrepreneurs. You need to be grinding, hustling, and working all the time. And I don't believe that's the case at all. I think you need to be doing it in the right way, and flogging yourself to 15, 20 hours a day. That's not completely necessary. It's working smarter rather than harder, I think. And that's an ongoing lesson. If I feel like I'm doing too much, I've got to check myself and hold on a minute. You're booking a lot in here. There's a lot going on. Maybe take a little bit of a step back and take that time, spend that time with your daughter. Ultimately, what I'm doing now is I'm doing because of what I love, but also for a better life for my daughter, so that I can attend all the concerts that are on at school, or the sports days when she was younger. So if I'm sacrificing time for her to do this, then I'm doing it all the wrong way around. So self-discipline's been a big skill to learn.
Lesson number 9, it's not about you. What would you say to a person who's been made redundant from their job?
I'd say it's not about you, because it feels like it's about you. It feels very personal, but it's not about you. It's about something else that you can't control, be that lack of customers, be that restructures. There's something else that's gone on, and it's not about you. And it's easy to say, don't take it personally, because people said that to me at the time. And I was just like, well, yeah, but, you know, I've got to pay bills. I've got a mortgage, you know, I've got things to pay for. I've got to put food on the table. But ultimately, yeah, don't give up. It's not about you. And there's lots of techniques you can use to make yourself feel better going through that process. There's lots of support out there. You've just got to ask for it.
Lesson number 10, don't abuse relationships.
Yeah, that's one thing that's always interested me about the United States is people are not afraid to up sticks and move maybe from the East Coast to the West Coast in search of work, or to move from the South up to the North in search of work. It's very much an entrepreneurial society, and people are not afraid to take a risk or two to start a new life or to better themselves by moving from one state to another. What's the biggest lesson you'd like to share with the audience about starting your own business?
So I think it's really about working the relationships that you currently have. Too many people will say, go out and start cold calling and, you know, just do all this stuff on the internet. But to me, it's about who are the people in my world that could be mentors? Who are people that could be amazing referral sources? Who are the people in the world that if I offer them my products, they would want to buy, not that I have to force it down their throats. And so I really think that we already have, you know, a wide resource of people, whether it's on our social media or in this lovely electronic device, that we can reach out to and ask for their help. And you don't want to overstep. Like, I'm not going to go to Bill Gates and say, hey, will you be my mentor? Because, yeah, you know, I'm not going to reach out to the Queen and say, you know, I've got to be realistic with who I'm asking. But if it's people that I have relationships with, taking advantage of that without abusing those relationships can be really powerful. And they can give you that knowledge that they were looking for.
Lesson number 11, be resilient. What skills have you developed in the past 12 or 15 months as a professional speaker and magician and resilience coach?
Right. Okay. So when I say what skills I've learned, first of all, I have to say from a resilience point of view, the tools that I'd already learned had come, I could use. So they helped me to stay calm. They helped me to stay focused. That's not to say that I didn't have my days when I felt anxious. That's not to say that I didn't have days when I fell on the floor and I fell to my knees and I cried. That isn't to say that I didn't feel overwhelmed. But the thing about resilience is about having tools that will help you to cope with that. And it's okay to have, it's okay not to be okay from time to time. In fact, we need not to be okay from time to time to get so that we can express those feelings. And we can, as human beings, we're like pressure cookers. If we don't express our feelings, if we're feeling bad or if we're feeling down, then that pressure can build up and it can work against us. If we express it, we'll feel better for it afterwards, and we can then focus and do what we need to do. So the skills I'd learned and the tools I've learned for resilience and managing change have been very useful. The skills that I've learned more are more things like video editing, being able to present online, how to connect with an audience online. So that's been the main thing. It's about the presentation skills that I've learned in my case.
Lesson number 12, market yourself. What has been the biggest lesson you have learned as a professional person when you moved from employment into self-employment and starting your own coaching business?
Oh, wow. I think, John, learning about business and learning that it's okay to fail. And, you know, one of the things that I failed to do, this is another good lesson, is I did not market myself like I should have when I first started my business. And as you know, I have a podcast. You were one of my first guests. So it has given me the opportunity to have interviews like this. I mean, it's a reciprocal thing. for people who have podcast shows to interview one another. But then you take those interviews and you put them out there and help market yourself. So that's one big, big lesson that I learned, is to market yourself. You absolutely have to do that. They're not going to come find you hiding in the closet.
We want to thank all the guests who appeared on the show and you for watching all the videos. What lessons did you learn? Please let us know in the comments section below.